Yeah, I think we are live. Yeah, awesome. So, yeah, hey everyone, and great to see you here. And hope you had a great week. And today's event is about collaborating concurrently with and applying our open source technology. And we are bringing some bunch of great projects and great people over here. So we have Aram from the project called Zellij. So he built a great stuff for concurrent coding and solving problems in this domain. And he has a great experience over 15 years in the industry. And he's been a blogger, a software developer, and an open source advocate indeed. So we'll have a lot to speak about his projects, his contribution, and we have Ramón from the same team, and we already had him in our platform before, and great to see him again. So he has a lot of experience, and as a developer educator, he's been doing really great with Twitch streams and some JavaScript bootcamps. He has over 9,000 participants in his recent bootcamp, and I'm really excited to have him. And he's been a great acquaintance of mine, and he's been leading me in everything I do. So let's get into the topic. So today it's really interesting, and this is one of a kind, this project. And so I would like to ask Aram, so how did you just start this project, and what is the reason behind it?
Sure. Yeah, hi. So nice to meet you, first of all. Thanks for having me. I think the best way to start is to kind of talk about the open source project, to talk about Zellij, and then to talk about like Devsession, which is the company that we're building around it. So Zellij, you can check it out on GitHub. I'm sure there will be a link somewhere. It's a terminal workspace and multiplexer. For those familiar, it's kind of similar to Tmux or Screen, which you start it inside your terminal, and it allows you to have like different tabs, different panes, and to like have specialized plugins that you can write in any language that run inside there. And I use it personally for development all the time because I'm a Vim user. So I started it because as a Vim user, I like most of the time, I think as most Vim users, we kind of built an environment around our Vim. Yeah. We use Tmux or i3 or something like that. And so I kind of found myself writing a lot of like bash scripts that do stuff like, I open a file here and then it opens a Vim window there, and it has to be under this Vim window and all sorts of stuff, which was pretty cool, but it was really annoying to move to different computers because I have to like kind of move all this setup, and it wasn't easy. Not to mention sharing it with other people, like, hey, you have a cool setup, I want it too. And like, take these 7 bash scripts and config them this way, and like, oh, never mind. So I wanted to kind of build a platform that would allow people to do that easily, to have like a config file that they can send, and that's it. So that's how Zellij started. And recently, we kind of added collaboration features to Zellij as well, which allow multiple people to connect to one session. And you kind of get the Google Docs experience inside your terminal, that every person has a cursor with a different color, and you can see them typing, and they're in this pane and you're in this pane, and you can do like different stuff and collaborate on a task together. So I thought it would be pretty cool to build a company around this that, first of all, gives this away as a service. So you don't have to set up a server on your computer and do the whole NAT traversal and port forwarding and all that. You just get a URL, give it to someone else, and that's it. We do the proxying for you. And in addition, I want to also bring in people who don't necessarily use the terminal for development. I think it can be really cool for me as a Vim user to collaborate with a VS Code user or an IntelliJ user, Atom user, if people still use that today. And this is essentially Devsession. It's building joint experience of collaboration and working together with different cursors like Google Docs on the same code base.
Interesting. So, Ramón, would you like to add something to it?
I'm having some tech issues today. Sorry, folks. Thank you. No, when I met Aram, I was actually using
no problem.
a piece of software called Tmux for managing my Windows and my terminal. And I was a Tmux plus Vim user for a very, very long time. And I was very, very happy with it. Admitting to myself in retrospect that it took me reading a book. And I believe that book was from the pragmatic programmer called, do you know what? I don't remember. I don't remember the name. It was Tmux book, prog. I know it's irrelevant, but here we go. Productive mouse-free development. I'm going to share the link just in case folks are curious about like window management in the terminal. So I read this book, and then I finally got into terminal window management. I even took that a step further. I used to use this Ruby gem called Tmuxinator. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of it. Did you use it? Nice.
Yeah, it's nice.
Tmuxinator was great because it let me define with YAML what the layout of my window should be for a specific project. So I could just run a script and it would just like set up on my terminal for my and yeah, it was just a lot of fun for getting that all running. And when I met Aram and he showed me Zellij, how, first of all, I'm a big fan of Rust. So the fact that it's running on Rust already was like, ooh, interesting. One of my favorite open source communities at the moment. And so I checked it out and I loved that I was able to get up. It felt like Tmux, but I had already read the book. Now I'll admit, a lot of this comes as praise coming, now that I'm working with Aram, it's very easy to say, like, well, he's biased. But I promise this was just an experience that out of the box clicked for me. And so I was already intrigued by this ability to make the terminal window management approachable. So there was that. And then when we started talking about Devsession and how we want to, how the aim there is to make concurrent collaboration. So something that just, rolls off the tongue, so to speak, where you can just share a link with somebody, no matter what editor they're in. I actually set up a poll. I hope I did this correctly. I'm very curious to see what text editors folks are using. I don't think I can participate in my own poll. Otherwise, there would be a vote for Vim. But that's totally fine. To be able to just set up super quick, get up and running, to be able to set up a multiplayer session, a dev session, right? This immediately intrigued me, especially the fact that it's, powered by and complementing open source technologies, to be able to say, hey, as Aram said, provide a facilitation for something that you can't just open source your way around. That to me is something that's really compelling. So when it came to me as doing, I don't know if I'm getting ahead of myself by talking about, things that I've been thinking about in terms of developer relations when it comes to using collaborative tools. I think this is something that's really significant when it comes to that. But I don't know if I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay. Oh yeah, sure. I also want to read a comment. Nicholas VK writes, I think I remember you from the RubyConf. Awesome. Hello. Good to see you. I'm afraid it's gonna, I wonder which RubyConf it is. I don't think I've been to RubyConf itself, but I've been to RailsConf and Euroco, the European Ruby Conference. I'm curious to know which one we met at, and nice to see you again. No, I do not. I refuse. Oh, Euroco Vienna. Cool. That's the one that I helped organize. Awesome. That was a good time. That was 4 years ago. My goodness. Anyway, so when it comes to my developer relations work, I feel like this is something, especially now in an age of lots of remote going on, having the ability to facilitate that collaboration in a way that doesn't leave the comfort zone is, for me, something that's really compelling. one thing that I've started doing, as Joshua very kindly mentioned, that starting last year, is lots of live streaming. I've been doing a lot of live streaming, a lot of pair programming over live streaming. Actually, I've actually been doing a lot of mob programming, or as I was taught, and a much better term, ensemble programming over live stream is something that I find really amazing, because you can have, if you're not familiar with the term, you've got a driver, the person who's typing, the navigator, the person who's, directing, telling you what to code, and you've got the rest of the group, the ensemble, usually in the chat, giving suggestions, looking up stuff in documentation, telling you oh so gently that what you're doing is completely wrong. I'm not being sarcastic. That is one of the most helpful pieces of feedback, to be like, hey, hold on. Are you sure you wanna use a linked list for this? I'm just making up an example off the top of my head, but I think it applies there. So, and being a facilitator for live streams, being able to bring someone on who perhaps, for example, doesn't spend a lot of time live on stream, being able to put them in their comfort zone, so to speak, to just be like, hey, join our dev session, but hey, it's going to be in your Atom or your Sublime Text with your plugins, with all of your stuff there. And we're just going to collaborate like that. You can see my cursor. We can interact in different files. I think that's something that's going to be really helpful for live streaming. And I think it can go a step further from that. Sorry, I don't know if you had any questions about that. I could ramble all day.
Yeah, no problem. I think, that's great. And I told the attendees all over here. So you can just go to the Q&A tabs we have on Aviel. So you can ask questions and we will try to answer between the session or even after the session. So we'd love to see your questions there. I would like to know more about Zellij and how it is related to dev sessions once again. So how it actually works, and hopefully if you could share the working of it, the GIF, so it would be really great.
Sure. So, you want to know how we do the collaboration? For example. Okay. So, Zellij has a terminal multiplexer. Okay. So this means that it runs as a service on your machine, like kind of a daemon. And then you connect to it through a terminal window. You connect to this. You either start a new session in the terminal window or connect to an existing session, and the daemon keeps its state. So one can imagine that if you have two terminal windows, then both of them are connecting to the same session. So the session now knows it has two users, and it knows to assign like a web server essentially. It knows to assign a different color to every user, and to render something that looks like a cursor, of a different color for each user, because the terminal emulator only has one cursor, so we had to kind of hack around that. So what we're doing right now in Zellij, we're writing a web client. So this would allow people to connect to the Zellij daemon, not just with a terminal emulator, but also with their browser. Imagine I know it happens to me all the time. I'm in my browser, I'm looking something up, and I have this tendency to want to open a new tab and be in my terminal for some reason, but it never works because it's always the browser. So I want to be able to open a new tab and be in my terminal. This is what the web server will allow us, because it will be kind of rendered in the browser, just like it is in the terminal. So if we take this a step further and we say, okay, I don't have to be connected to my same computer. I can do it from start a web server and have a different computer connect and be in my terminal. Then this kind of starts to give you an idea about how we're doing the first part of Devsession, which is sharing terminal sessions. We will give you a URL that will just there will be a server in the middle that just kind of do the proxy, and you connect to it, and people are in your session, SSL, end-to-end encrypted, whatever you want. then we can say, okay, I don't have to be like a terminal or a browser in order to connect to this. I can also be VS Code. I can also be IntelliJ. I can also be whatever Fleet, I think, is something new that kind of came out. So I can be an IDE, and I can connect to the same session that you are and get text at me, like a text buffer that says, this is what you're editing. And when I'm editing, I'm doing like actions on it, it sends like stuff and says, this person is editing this, and I see it in my Vim, another IDE, whatever. Like I see cursors dancing around there, So this is kind of the progression of the technology from Zellij to where Devsession is going to be.
So basically, you can choose any editor of your choice or any IDE of your choice, and you can just collaborate with Devsession with the help of Devsession.
Yeah, for sure. You download a plugin. It's like any editor that has a plugin system.
Yeah.
I think most of them do these days. So any editor that has a plugin system will have a plugin for everything, and for sure, I think that's the main thing, because there are, like for example, you have VS Code Live Share, which does something similar, but only in VS Code. Like your whole team has to be working with VS Code, which is cool. It's great, but like, even though VS Code has a very large market share, you can imagine that if only one person in the team is working with Vim, you can't do that, because so I don't think there are a lot of teams out there that are 100% VS Code. And this is like this is the problem that we will be solving with that.
I think that's very revolutionary. I think inside the browser, that is something new, which I never saw that one. So I used to code with VS Code Live Share. I remember in my previous work experience where I used to do, but sometimes it was very problematic. Like it used to not work, and sometimes it used to work. And I was not happy with it, to be honest.
Yeah.
So I preferred like sharing the screen on Zoom, like this is the problem, and this is what we are trying to do. And then it was a lot of hassle, right? It was a lot of hassle for me. And glad that you're bringing this up for the community, and that's great. And it's also the open source, and the best part. So I would like to know about your open source journey as we have come to this point, because you have been working for a lot of years. And how did you get into open source, and what inspired you? Is it just because I've heard from a lot of folks that I love to do this one, that's why I'm doing this. And some people are like, someone motivated me or someone connected with me that this is the project, so I got inspired and I got into this one. So how did it actually begin for you personally?
Wow, that's a good question, but it's I'm trying to think where to start. I became aware of open source when I was I think when I installed Linux for the first time. I was 14, 15, something like this. This was Red Hat 6, not Red Hat Enterprise Linux, Red Hat. Back then they were completely open source and free. I guess it's what became CentOS eventually. So then I became aware of open source. It was like, oh, wow, cool. This is this whole operating system that you can look into and find out how it's working. And if you don't like something, you can just change it. So that was pretty cool. Then when I started out in tech, I started kind of from operations. I was back then, we called it like sysadmin, sysop, basically. A few years later, we started calling ourselves DevOps. Then I think I went toward open source all the time immediately, because things that didn't work, I just changed the code. And then if I found something good that works for me, I wanted to share it with others. A lot of my journey at the beginning, I was a Perl programmer. So I did a lot of Perl open source projects. If anyone remembers Dreamwidth, for example, it was a popular blogging platform. I contributed there to a lot of Perl open source libraries and the Nagios ecosystem. I think it used to be a thing. Throughout my career, I shared stuff that worked for me on open source. I joined communities in order to learn new technologies. When the JavaScript explosion happened around, I guess it was 2014, 2015, something like that. I was also I'm super excited to get involved in that way and contribute to NPM and Yarn and projects of that sort. So I guess it was kind of all throughout my career, part of my work.
Interesting. So what about you, Ramón? You have been silent.
Aram is one of the friendliest, open source maintainers that I've met in a long time. So listening to him talk is so inspirational for me. But I'm happy to share a little bit about my open source journey, because my open source journey doesn't actually have to do that much to do with code. My open source journey, began when I stepped into my first Ruby meetup in 2012. I had been freelancing as a software developer for a few years, and I was enjoying it, but I saw stuff online, and I discovered meetup.com, which, especially in the pre-heavily remote times, was a great way to find folks to connect with about different tech stuff, especially here in Vienna. And I was extremely shy. So I still am very shy. I just hide it better now. But what happened was I started going to these meetups, and I started learning about different projects like Rails Girls or Rails Girls Summer of Code, which were both initiatives to help underrepresented folks get into not just programming for Rails Girls, but for open source development with Rails Girls Summer of Code. And this was a project that I ended up joining in 2014, and I just stuck with for 6 years, helping them organize this. And what it was, sadly, it's defunct now, but what it was a project where underrepresented pairs from around the world could apply to do open source, and it was a crowdfunded stipend that they were given to be able to contribute. And so different open source projects would come in and be like, hey, I could use some help with, for example, what's that Rust-based browser called? Browser engine. Servo, yes, exactly. So Servo, for example, was a project that was on Rails Girls Summer of Code. A bunch of Rails projects. RubyGems.org was a part of the Rails Girls project, and so my job was to coordinate that. My job was to review applications. My job was to help mentor folks, be a support for those teams. And that enabled me to support folks from around the world. And what was wonderful about that is that I was still involved in open source, but in a more indirect way, in a way that I learned through a brilliant book that I read by Nadia Egbal called Working in Public, which I highly recommend, and I'll drop a link, is called non-code contributions. Because what I'm doing is not contributing code, I'm contributing to open source through motivation, awareness, hype, energy, enablement, the enablement of people who are much smarter, much more clever than I am to be able to contribute to code. Lately, I've also, now that I feel a lot more confident in my coding skills, been able to contribute. For example, Aram and I had a stream last week. Feels like months ago, but it was last week, where we coded on Zellij, inside Zellij, which was amazing. For example, a lot of my work lately has been on open source onboarding to help, because a big challenge, especially with established open source projects, is how do you make a project welcoming enough so that somebody can join in and say, hey, this is how you get started. This is what you could contribute with, but at the same time say, if you have the energy, if you have the stamina for it, to say, hey, I'm happy to pair with you. Let's hop on a dev session. Let's hop on some kind of concurrent coding session and say, hey, let's get you onboarded onto my project. So I did a lot of live streams to do with that, where I would just make a contribution. It was like one of my favorite things I've done in my career was like during Hacktoberfest, I just reached out to different open source maintainers, and I said, hey, I'm doing a live stream. without me looking at your code, would you feel okay guiding me through making a contribution to your project in a programming language that I've probably never touched? And that month, I worked in PHP, Python, Go, none of which I do in my daily work. And it was great. It was great. Sorry, that was a bit of a ramble. My point is, I think open source contributions can come from a myriad of places and not just the code itself.
Interesting. Thanks for that. I love that you mentioned about enablement when you onboard someone clever than you, and he's giving direct value to the project, and you are an enabler. So you have some role in sustaining the open source and the project as well. So even Aviel is working towards open source sustainability. Like, you can check out our projects we have. And if you'd love to contribute, you can ping me, or you can just email to hello@aviel.com. So we can take off from there. So coming to the problem of sustainability. So Aram, so you have some great experience in understanding different projects you have been working, right? So what do you understand, and how can we possibly solve this problem?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I honestly think there is, at least at the moment, there is no answer. Like, I'll start with that. It doesn't mean I don't have any thoughts about it, but yeah. So, open source sustainability is an unanswered question for now. I have a GitHub sponsors. I don't push it a lot, so that's why I don't have a lot of contributions. But every now and then, someone is very enthusiastic about, like, a bug I fixed in a project or a feature I added, and is looking for a way to contribute. And then they find my GitHub sponsors. That's great, but it's not something I can make a living out of. Right now, I'm living off my savings, and my goal is to start a company, essentially, in order to sustain my open source work. And the company, it will be giving services to open source users. It itself, its whole code will be open source. I think open source is a great business model for companies in its various ways. I also worked in companies that were open source completely. I think that's great. Other than that, I think the question is what sort of project you are and how can you monetize it. If you want to monetize it, I don't think it has to be. But while I think it is important for open source developers to be compensated for their work, I don't think this needs to be a goal. I think if you want to earn a salary, don't go into open source. I mean, I'm sorry, it sounds like a terrible thing to say, but it's very hard to make a living through open source. And these are unanswered questions. Yeah. Maybe sometime in the future they will be, but right now there is no money here. We do it out of passion. We do it because we love the work. It's like artists don't go to paint because they want to sell their art, because I guess it's about the same percentage of artists, of like painters who manage to make a living out of it, and open source developers or any other form of art. That's kind of what it is. We do it because we're passionate about it and because we want to make something exist or contribute to something that's greater than us.
Yeah, there's a question by Siddharth I would like to take from the chats, which is related. I mean, what do you think are the challenges you'd face when you try to make a company out of an open source project?
Oh, wow. So lots of challenges. I think the main and most important one is how not to alienate your users. It's very important that, like, for example, with Zellij, we have a community around the project. I have lots of friends there, and I don't want them to feel like I'm selling them out, because I'm not. It's more about how to help myself continuing to do the work that I'm doing on the project, and eventually other maintainers as well. So that's a big challenge. I think from this, everything else comes. It's how you communicate this, how you talk to people, how you bring other people on board. Because open source has this, like, kind of, I guess in some places, open source has this stigma of being, anti-establishment and sticking it to the man, and such. I think it's like kind of comes from the FOSS world of like early GNU Linux, I should say. And I don't think that's right. I think open source is a great way to share information, and I think it's okay to want to like make money out of it, build a company out of it, and still keep the community and the users that you have. I don't know, does that answer the question?
Interesting. That's great. That definitely makes sense. Indeed. Yeah. We're talking facts. Yeah. Great. Yeah. So there is another question. I think, Ramón, if you could take that, or Aram, if you could take that. So I would suggest to use Q&A section, because it will get into our database, and your questions will be tracked even after the session. So you can use Q&A instead of just putting your questions in chats. So should fresh graduates opt for open source, or should get a proper developer job?
Fresh graduates, that's a challenging question. I'm going to preface that by saying one thing, and that is that I haven't graduated from university yet. So this is going to come from an experience of talking to lots of people and talking to, working with people who did graduate. In my experience, your mileage will vary depending on where you are in the world. In places, I can tell you my experience in Austria, in Vienna. If you are looking for a job as a fresh graduate, if you're looking to build experience that looks good, given that Vienna, for example, has a very, let's say, checking boxes oriented approach to finding work and qualifications and salary calculation, then it makes sense to sort of get on that corporate, how can I put this? Pipeline, right? Now, that has changed over time. And for example, for myself, who didn't graduate and to this day hasn't worked a full-time job yet, I've been a freelancer my entire life, or a part-timer, or a contractor, or a consultant. I've been very fortunate that I've been able to leverage the work that I've done, the public-facing work that I've done, putting my open source work and displaying it, using it as a portfolio to say, yes, I don't have a position from this year to this year, but I've got this experience for myself. That has able to help me find work and sort of get more lucrative work. But again, your mileage may vary, and depending on where you are in the world, depending on what your situation is, depending on what your attitude is towards work, it could also be a personal preference thing. As a freelancer, I can tell you one thing that led me to a very intense burnout in 2018 was this notion that it's Saturday night. I could be on the sofa watching television. I could be out on a hike with my friends, or I could be making a little bit more hourly money by doing some more work. Yeah. It was very easy to fall into that trap of saying, "Hey, no, I'll make some more money, and then I can afford a video games console or something, something like that." So I think being conscientious of how one operates as a person, how one rests properly. We were talking about this in the backstage. I used to work until midnight, 1 a.m, 2 a.m. I can't do that anymore. I'm not a young man anymore. And that's fine. It's yeah, that's my ramble. How about you, Aram? I'd love to hear what your take is on this as well.
Ooh, so I could not afford to go to university, so I also did not graduate and never attended, at least not computer science. So yeah, for me, open source is the most how should I put this? Open source is what has been driving my career. I know this is not true to everyone, and it depends what you do. But for me, it was always it was the best thing on my CV for every stage in my career. People wanted to hear much more about what I did in open source than what I did in previous companies. So that's my experience. But I also put a lot of time in it. There were months and months between jobs where I didn't fully look, where I said, okay, for these 4 months, I'm burning all my savings and I'm contributing to this project. It's annoying to me that this open source project that I use doesn't have this feature, so that's what I'm going to do. And you work out in the open. You're able to show companies, this is my work. I got accepted into jobs sometimes without an interview because I was just, I coded. I was a maintainer of a popular project that company used. So they're like, okay, if you can do this, we know we'll have a frontal interview with you to find out that we can work together. But tech-wise, yeah. So that's my perspective, but it's a bit of an extreme perspective because of my life circumstances. So I guess it will be different for everyone.
So basically, I want to sum up both of them. So basically, what really matters is connecting with people with the right passion, right? So it's more about the way you're connecting with your peers, and that will lead you to a success point, right? So, and I'm just asking again, Danish, if you are looking for a job, for money or for passion. So because there are two aspects when it comes into open source, like many of them work for passion. And I've seen a lot of maintainers, they tell about their stories, like they live in a small house where they have only 2 rooms or anything like that. So they used to work full part-time for 3 days a week, and rest of the 4 days they used to do open source. But they used to do part-time work only for food and shelter. So that was not what they liked, but they have to do it because they want to get money and they have to live a life, right? So it depends on different people. And I think it was the maintainer of NA10. It is there on Aviel. So I was there in that session backstage. So I heard a lot of stories, and depends on different persons. So I would suggest that whatever Ramón and Aram mentioned, so you can just take that and work on that one. There is no straight answer. You can have your own answer yourself. Yeah. Right. So anything?
Sorry, I was just going to say the ever annoying "it depends" answer.
Accurate.
Yeah. Yeah. So great. So I think, yeah, that's great. Great engagement, and thanks for asking these questions. Really helps us to engage and to add value. So coming back to our session, so I have a few questions, Aram. So when this Devsession is going to be released, and what about the early access for this? Are there any plans?
So right now we're in the fundraising stage. We're seeking venture capital in order to fund the startup. So work on Devsession itself is not being done. Rather, we're doing work on the Zellij site to like make it better to it's constantly improving, and that's where everything is happening. Mostly when once we get funded, then we will start. And I think the terminal sharing part is something that we can put out pretty quickly, about like a month of development or something like that. So that's the best answer I can give right now. Yeah.
Okay. And will the terminal sharing and ID sync also be open source?
Yes. I'm like, as I mentioned, I'm an open source person to my bone. I've been so all the time.
Yeah.
I believe in creating value by giving a service and not by creating intellectual property. I don't believe in intellectual property. So really, it will be completely open source. I would like, these are not things that I can promise right now, because this is a business model for like a company that will exist in the future. But my preference would be to create a server, to run it as a service, and then to allow people to, like, you don't want to pay me, start your own server. Sure, here's the code. Like, go ahead. Yeah, because like I think the value is in giving you a service that you can trust and that just works for you without you having to do any work.
I'd love to add on to that, if I may.
Interesting.
The terminal sharing is actually already live for Zellij. Is something that you can already use. It requires some setup. You can actually totally start using it. And in fact, that's something we did. I'd love to share a YouTube link, if I may, to if folks are interested, to a stream the stream that I mentioned earlier, where we worked on Zellij within Zellij. Like, you could see both of our cursors running. I believe I got a color I like for my cursor as well, so I was pretty happy about that. Terminal multiplayer session. In case folks are interested, like it works, and it works really well, because you're essentially just working over a stable connection. You know, it's our connection that we have at home.
Yeah.
Maybe you can just share your screen.
Oh yeah.
Show that.
Yeah, good idea. Let me
the preview.
Let me do that. See if I can get. Yeah. I've got Aram and I actually made a GIF. We used. What was the name of the tool we used for recording the terminal?
Terminalizer, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm gonna look that up as well. But first, I'm gonna show that GIF, because it's pretty compelling. I'm just gonna share a link to the. I'm just gonna share a bunch of links. Let me share my screen real quick.
I think you can see it. I put it on the Zellij README itself.
Great. I was looking at the Zellij blog as well.
Yeah.
I'll go with.
Yeah, you can go to.
In the README file, I can see that.
Yeah, so like the second GIF is me and Ramón collaborating.
Yeah, so you should be able to see us there. So I'm on the panel. I'm on the pane on the left, where I'm being very, very slow. Because the code base is new to me, but on the right you can see Aram like just killing it with and we're both writing Rust, and that's fully open source and available for whoever wants to use it.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's already live, exactly.
Yeah, for sure, and we're adding features to it all the time. It doesn't yet have all the VS Code Lighter stuff, like follow cursor and stuff, but these are things that come. We will be adding them over time.
Awesome.
Great.
Everyone is mesmerized by the.
Would love to. Maybe I have one request.
Please.
I have one request from my side. If you could do the launch event on our platform, like whenever it goes live, and Devsession.
I don't know what we will be planning for a launch event, but we would be happy to come on your platform and and talk about it and show it. I don't know if that will be the event or not, but happily.
Yeah. So whatever it helps you, you can just let me know. We can do something because this is very unique way of collaborating, and it's very essential and useful for people who are working remotely. And of course, all the open sources are remote, right? No one works at an office and do open source, I guess. So it would be really great. And if we have a lot of people engaging with that product, it will be beneficial for you as well, right? So, yeah.
And from the developer relations perspective, I can tell you the best way I do my work is my favorite way to do my work is through collaboration, is through, pairing. And pairing doesn't necessarily have to be just programming. It can be, for example, working on any kind of content, for example, the stream, which was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Awesome. So any questions you can take? Ramón, if you want to add something which I missed or which anyone missed over here.
I would love to open a can of worms, if I may, and talk about feature flags. So one of the things that I learned while collaborating with Aram and learning about this is this notion of using feature flags and in conjunction with trunk-based development as a technique for being able to have a workflow that sits on top of Git and complements it. But I want to I would love to ask, like, Aram, would you mind giving me the same explanation you gave to me about what your thought process was here and your argument for it?
Sure. Okay. But I am preparing to hear a lot of objections from and resistance from the people here. So okay. I think I'll take this like a step backwards and talk about the problem. So let's say we're working in this method. We have this magical product that allows us to connect our IDEs and work together. This is great for pairing and such, but I don't intend for it to only be for pairing. I think the goal of Devsession is for people to use this to write code all the time, for all of your coding work to be inside a Devsession, and then once you and your team decide, you commit together to Git. Then people ask, okay, but why? And my answer to this is that, I guess I'll start with kind of a story. When I started developing, it was beginning of 2000s, something like that. You kind of do your own hacking in your basement and work on stuff alone. And then you reach the stage where you want to collaborate with someone. So someone told me, okay, this is how you do it. This is SVN. Back then it was before
Same
Git.
Here.
But it's basically the same idea as Git for those not as old as us. Basically the same idea. And I looked at that and was like, are you serious with me? Are you kidding? Why do I need to do this? It's okay, so I work on my feature for 2 weeks, you work on a different feature for 2 weeks, and then we spend however many hours or days together on a merge conflict, because there is no way we can coordinate this completely unless we work on features that don't touch each other at all. It's okay, we have online games, which are much more difficult to consolidate than text. Why can't we work on the same thing together, the same person? It's no, that's not how we do that. Okay. So that idea kind of stayed at the back of my mind. And this is what I want to do today, because seriously, we have the internet. Why do we need to do this asynchronous thing? And this is where Devsession comes in, because I don't want this to be just for pairing. I want this to be all the time continuous, where this is how you write code. You go into the code base, you see what your teammates are doing, and you kind of work with them. However, as Ramón alluded to, there are some issues with this, because what happens if we need to change the same line at the same time? Mm-hmm. What happens if you're doing something to like this code base, and I want to do something else, and we don't have time to like talk about this and collaborate and such. So then for this, we I adopted some methods from trunk-based development. Trunk-based development, in case you don't know, maybe Ramón will throw us up a link, is like it's a basically methodology that kind of says what Devsession is saying, but using like source control, Git, which says, okay, just whatever you're doing, commit to trunk. That was the SVN name. Today we'll call it like main. Commit to main all the time, 3 times a day, 5 times a day. Every line that you change, commit to main. Just make sure it doesn't break. And the way to do that is to kind of have a feature flag, which is essentially you have a configuration somewhere that says which feature flags are on and off, and you wrap your changes around that feature flag. So essentially, you're writing in changes inside an if-false block. And then your changes don't break or affect the code base as is, so long as they compile. And this is what we do with Devsession. So imagine you're inside the session. You have a list of your teammates' names. We have something similar on the website if you want to take a look at an animation of how this works. You have a list of your teammates' names, and you can and if they're doing something that contradicts what you're doing right now, and you don't have like time to talk with them about it, you can just switch them off, which is essentially switching off their feature flag. And like for you in your context, they are switched off. For them, they are switched on, and maybe you are switched off, depending on the change. And then you can kind of do things that contradict each other in the same code base without having to branch out and then merge like 2 days later. Like I think, oh yeah, here's the animation. So this like gives a good idea of seeing code on the screen that is turned on and off and then checked against the tests to make sure it's like still passing. So this, along with some other methodologies, is what will allow us to have like concurrent collaboration, as we call it, in the same session. This
is great because whenever this topic comes up, whenever we talked about this, I have to admit, it took me a while to fully wrap my head around it as well. I posted a link in the chat to a talk from Sam Newman called "Feature Branches and Toggles in a Post GitHub World." Highly recommend it to sort of unlock to sort of help unlock the thought process further behind this, and yeah, to sort of. I like the notion. I like this comparison with multiplayer online video games, because, you know, if they can do something as instantaneous as, for example, 2 players pressing a button at the same time, say if it's like, I don't know, a one-on-one fighting video game, how to determine who punched first or who threw the fireball first. There's so much engineering behind that I think for something like text, like Aram said, like can totally be applied. But there's that resistance that comes from the question, okay, but how do I make this fit in with my Git work process? Do we aim to replace Git? And the answer to that is no, absolutely not.
Yeah, Git is really good as a source control, like to have a history and have like things that worked and like a state of the code that is the source of truth. But it's just, I'm sorry, it's very bad at collaboration. I don't think merge conflicts are the way. No one likes merge conflicts. It's like, and then your teammates like kind of become something that it's like, oh, damn it, Alice also changed that piece of code instead. Oh, wow, great. Alice is helping me out. It's like you have to kind of fight against your teammates, and that's not a way to work. Yeah.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, any more questions? I think we are almost closing in a few minutes. Yeah, there's a question from Q&As.
Yeah, let me read it out. What would the learning curve look like for somebody planning to make use of your tool?
Can I answer? Cool. So the way people will work with this is something that we still need to develop. I think this is a human problem much more than a technological problem. And I think it's a good question because I think like all the source control tools, SVN, Git, Mercurial was somewhere in the middle if anyone remembers it. They kind of taught us ways of working. So we have this like in our head and we need to get out of this mode of thinking. But I want to spend a lot of time about making this transition smooth. I think if there is a learning curve and it's not something you can jump straight into, then we didn't do a good job. I don't think there needs to be a learning curve. That's, by the way, something that Ramón kind of mentioned at the beginning that was very important to me with Zellij, because as Ramón mentioned, in order to use Tmux, he had to read a book. I think any tool that forces you to read a book is like, maybe it's a good tool, but it doesn't do a good job. It doesn't do a good service to you as a user. So like Zellij, for example, it's something you download, you start it, and you immediately know how to use it because it kind of has tips and shows you like what to do. I also intend for the same to be with Devsession. I don't want you to have to like say, okay, what do I have to do if la la la? No, I want it to just work for you.
I agree. I'd love to add on to that. It's the whole aim is to keep developers in the tools that they are comfortable with and that they are happy with. When you go into a pairing session and you have to, use a new tool in the browser that's like, oh, now this is like a fork of VS Code that you're using in a browser and it's weird and I can't use my extensions or I can't use my Vim keys here or something. And you're like, okay, I can, make my way here, but I'm not in my zone. So the aim is to be able to plop something that you can just, open a URL in your browser and just be like back in your editor, doing the things that you know how to do with the tools that you know how to use. From a developer perspective, I would love to also add, for example, because this notion of developer comfort is something that I find really compelling. Say if, going with live streaming again, why do we need to be watching somebody's editor when I could, for example, be connected to their dev session and be watching in a read-only mode from my editor with my colors, with my funky font, with my fun font, with all of the ligatures and the cursive and all that fun stuff that people like to have for themselves. Why not be able to say, hey, you just want to hear my voice and you want to look at the code. I mean, if you want to see my camera, that's very nice. I put a lot of effort into my workspace and it's much appreciated, but let's look at the code in my environment. And I think that's something that, again, it's about developer comfort. It's about and when I say comfort, I mean like comfort can often be misconstrued as also meaning an unwillingness to change. And I don't think that's fair, because I think it's also about being able to embrace what makes somebody productive in a way that doesn't mean like, churning out lots of code, but also being able to have those thought processes unlocked. That was a lot of rambling and I apologize, but I hope that makes sense.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Developer comfort could be relative. Yeah.
Oh yeah, as Siddharth says, like I'm hoping you have plans on having a community providing you UX suggestions. Absolutely, because I'd love to take this, if I may, Aram. The whole point of what we're trying to do here is have the people define what UX works best for them, aside from beyond opening a link from your browser. It's your browser. It's not important to us what browser you use. What editor you use, also fine. And given it's open source, we want to take it a step further and say, like, help us, like, by using it, by giving out that feedback to help folks dictate what the best use of a tool is.
Great, awesome.
Does that make?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. That's what we do. That's what we do with Zellij, by the way. Essentially, people give a lot of UX advice all the time. I think that's one of the big benefits of being open source. And yeah, for sure, planning to do the same thing with Devsession. And
I can vouch for that. I only started using Zellij back in late October, and I haven't opened Tmux since then. I'm just saying. Again, I'm biased, but still.
Yeah.
Right. Awesome. Yeah, I think it was a great conversation. So would you like to sum up with a conclusion of what is going to come, and would you like to give any suggestions for the viewers?
Sure. So, yeah, currently we're in the fundraising stage. So we're going to hopefully start the company soon. Then we'll have a lot of news and hiring people, and very quickly bringing the first product into the terminal sharing to releasing it. And yeah, for now, if you want to try out Zellij, then for sure, maybe someone can put up a link, give it a try, hit us up on our Discord. If you want, you can have bring suggestions of what you want to see, contribute code. We're very friendly to new contributors and super excited when everyone wants to join. And yeah, I think that's it for me.
Same here. I just want to add,
Awesome.
try out the tools that work, the tools that you're using. A lot of these do run on open source technologies. If you find something that compels you to say, hey, you know what, this is something that I could contribute to, have a look at the community. I think having a community behind a tool is critical for its success. Having an open communication, being able to see, for example, how many folks are contributing, how many folks are contributing a lot. Having a look, for example, Aram helps with the team govern a thriving open source community that are on Discord, are friendly, are open, are lively. They joined the stream. They were, trying to convince us to get on NeoVim, which I'll admit I hadn't tried yet. So I failed a little bit there. But having that openness to talk to me, one of the most important things to being a successful software engineer is being able to communicate your ideas. That's what you're doing with code, as well as giving instructions to a computer. You're also communicating to your fellow human beings how something is meant to work. If, for example, you might have introduced a bug. Yeah, I think that's my parting words.
Yeah.
Great. Awesome. I think we will have a lot of questions, as most of them don't know what is concurrent coding and how we can resolve, right? And Devsession could be a great solution for them, and they can learn and they can share more questions. So I just joined your Discord community.
Awesome.
So it would be great I'll take some time and explore, and I would like to contribute to the community as well, because non-code contributions are important. Yeah. I may not be able to contribute in code.
You absolutely can.
Yeah.
You absolutely
For sure.
can.
Yeah, I totally agree. I guided people in contributing stuff that annoyed them, people who never wrote Rust, to just, okay, go here, do this, totally possible if you want to, of course.
Great. Okay, I'll try that too. I'll try to learn Rust. Great.
Cool.
Awesome. Yeah, if any questions, you can. Yeah, thanks, Victor. And if any questions, you can join the community or ask in Aviel Discord. There's a help and feedback section, or you can just follow the thread in the community discussion channel. And would love to have another session, which will maybe after the release or official release of the project. So we are looking forward. So this is not the end. And thanks again, Ramón and Aram. So thanks for taking your time and helping open source to grow. That is our end goal as Aviel as well. So good to have you in the community, and looking forward for more sessions and more value to be given to the community by you. Great.
Yeah, happily. And
was a
thanks
good
for having
time.
us.
Thank you
Looking
very
forward to
much.
next time.
Yeah.
And to the viewers, thank you for your questions.
Good day, everyone. Yeah.